You have now arrived at your destination.
OJ, this is such a joy to do. I heard so many good things from Danny Herzberg before this show and many other guests, so thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
That is very, very kind of you. I've been looking forward to this one. But I want to start with some context. So you've worked in some of the most incredible hypergrowth companies from Dropbox to Asana. Tell me, how did you make your way into sales and come to lead some of these incredible sales orgs?
Well, I first couple of years in my career was in finance. I was in first started in equity research at Morgan Stanley, covering tech companies. That was my first exposure to how the sort of the intersection of tech and business. Then I went over to venture, and I worked at NEA for a bit. Loved my time there. In that experience, I really saw how amazing some investors were basically sort of leveraging their operating background to help founders. So I got that curious about operating, and all the GPs I really admired. They were like, "Hey, you should operate, and if you're going to operate, you either build product or you sell product. Everything else is supporting one of those two." And I was like, "Oh, interesting." And just one thing led to another. It was like 50-50. I went down the sales path, and that was the path I ended up on.
I love that. I love that kind of simplicity of you either build or you sell. I do want to ask that, when we look back at the time, 6 years Asana, 4 years Dropbox, at pivotal moments of scaling for both companies, when you think back to that, and if you isolate one or two key takeaways from each, what would you say they would be looking back and reflecting?
So Dropbox, I think for me, number one is that technology is just fundamentally different, adopted differently in businesses. B2B businesses are no longer by the traditional top-down way in terms of how technology is used in companies. Employees get to pick, right? And that started with Apple with the iPhone and probably around 2010, right? When people had this BYOD move, and Dropbox was the company that shattered and started the BYOA move. And so I think that's number one. And so as a result, number two is that PLG is fundamentally a very different kind of go-to-market than traditional B2B sales. I think that's the main thing I took from Dropbox. Had the opportunity to then apply that to Asana. And I think what I learned at Asana was, if I had to pick one thing, it would be this concept of product-led growth sales and traditional enterprise sales. When I first joined Asana, and even today, when I talk to a lot of people, I think there is this predominant view of that you got to pick one or the other. And at Asana, we pioneered and we try to do both at the same time. And I think the results were quite positive. And I think my takeaway is that it is possible. It's hard, but it's possible.
I speak to a lot of founders, and we're kind of diving straight in, kind of ignoring schedule, but I speak to a lot of founders today who are like, well, if we have product-led growth, we don't need a sales team because the product sells itself. How do you respond and advise those founders? At what point does it asymptote or plateau? How do you think about that?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on your product category and who you're trying to sell to, right? There are some categories where you can get really far with a self-serve only model. I think about Atlassian and how far they went in the sort of in that DevOps world. It makes total sense, right? No developer really wants to get on a phone or get cold called or whatever, even pick up a phone call from a random salesperson. Makes a ton of sense. Almost every other persona, sales makes sense, right? To complement, not to say that you have to lead with sales, but sales can really help you move up and get to the larger, more strategic conversations. So I think it depends on your product, but generally speaking, I think the decision to not have sales, you're just missing out on a lot of potential growth.
Listen, I totally agree, and I actually think to like Carl Parrish at Figma, who I think's done it very well in a PLG motion and layered it on top. We're going to get into that. I do want to start though, if we kind of go back to the beginning of a company life cycle and sales cycle, really, which is, I always think that founders are the ones that need to create the sales playbook. Do you agree that the founder needs to be the person to create the playbook, or can they bring someone in to do it?
So it's a question I get a bit. And the first thing I want to say is let's talk about what is a playbook. Because in the world of sales, hiring, and such, people talk about the word playbook, this P word, I don't even want to. I sometimes don't even want to use it because it means different things to different people. So like
Okay, so
for
to me, it means something that's repeatable and scalable, having been tried and tested, and it's like a process that you can cookie cut and replicate.
okay, I think that is it. Yes, that is a playbook. I think that's the second playbook you built, and that's a much easier playbook to build. I think the first one you got to figure out, especially if you're a product-led growth company, is what personas are you really want to sell to? Does your product really resonate with and drive amazing, incredible value? This playbook also tells you what is the best way of reaching these personas, because every persona acquires technology differently, right? And then third is like, what is the actual business value and how do you articulate it? So for me, that's like the initial playbook when I think about, hey, if you're thinking about hiring your first salesperson, you're probably at that stage where these are big open questions that you may not have answered. And if that is right, and so if that playbook hasn't been written, founder must be involved because you have to talk to the customers to learn, hey, this is where to hear the feedback firsthand so that you can then incorporate it into your product and eventually get to product market fit. So to me, that is higher order priority. Once you figure that out, it's actually quite easy to figure out the more, hey, we're going to do 3 calls here. We're going to use this email template to ping this person, and then we're going to text this person's mom. Like you can figure that out later. It's not rocket science. The harder part is the who you sell to and what are you selling.
So step one being that who we sell to, what we're selling, and how we're selling it in terms of like the words that we use and articulation. That's founder, and then stage 2, it's more plastic. Is that correct? Like the head of sales can work on that?
Yeah, so the second thing, right, around basically your selling process, the repeatable thing that everybody dreams about, like I want to just demystify that first. I don't think you create that playbook until you have at least 20 ramped AEs.
Wow.
Right? Where you have the right to say this is a playbook. Any sales leader says, I got a playbook, I got 5 AEs, and look at them like they're just doing my repeatable process. Look, it may be repeatable for the next month. It will not be scalable as you build more people because you just don't know. You have to figure out a lot, right? And so that's why this like playbook word is one that I just think it has all these connotations associated with it. And I think like you just have to be practical. Look, the reality is in your first 2 AEs, there is no playbook. You hire your first head of sales, you're piloting it, right? Like you may not even know if your product really resonates with, I don't know. Is your primary persona here the CIO or is it some functional leader like a VP of HR, right? That you don't know that, and if you don't know that, going after either of those requires a different play, right? And so I think that's the danger. It's like a lot of focus on the repeatability. I rather focus on agility.
Okay, let's go down that then. I mean, I've got loads of questions for you. But when you say you rather focus on agility, double down there. What do you mean by that?
I rather focus on instead of like, hey, trying to get people to like write up some playbook. Hey, actually be really nimble. This month we're going to focus right on answering these questions. Right, like for example, let's focus on which persona actually resonates most with our product. Who does our product resonate with most? Right. And let's this month, let's do a deep dive and sprint and like really focus there. Take that learning. All right, next month, let's learn what does it take to engage with some of these people. Right? Is it through a referral program that we should do this? Is it cold outbounding? Is it can we cold email these people? Right? Like because I'll tell you some personas you can, some probably not so much. Right? Okay. After you answer these questions, then you can piece it together. That is very, very, very obvious. So that's what I mean by agility. When I'm hiring my first leader or first couple people, I'm not telling them to come back with a playbook. I'm telling them to come back with learnings and insights.
This is the first time I've actually had to get out like a notebook and a pen to write questions so I don't forget them while you talk. My question to you first, and again, I said there's many. First is like, I always say to founders, and man, this is why I think VCs are so dangerous, because we actually give shit advice. But I always say to them, founders, you need to create stage 2, also stage 1 and stage 2 of the playbook, because if you don't, you hire reps. The reps generally are more junior. They come in without a playbook. They don't have anything to execute on. They don't hit numbers because they don't have a playbook to work against. They churn, and morale sucks, and that's very, very bad and toxic to get out of. How am I wrong then if the playbook isn't created till much later on? How would you change my advice? I actually need help here because I use that advice a lot.
I would say, look, you need to start with something, right? You need to the founder have gotten enough traction to have raised a seed or A round. They must have had enough traction to have something to start with, right? And so I think you can call that your first playbook. I think playbooks should be dynamic, and so it should be something where, okay, hey, I hired my first 2-3 AEs. They may be junior people. You're gonna start with this. Right, but I also expect you to make it better constantly, right? Tell me how to actually be more effective. How do you improve this part of the funnel? How do you improve this messaging? Right? Go test out these different copies, and you tell me what makes better. And I think that playbook, instead of thinking about it as a V2 or V3, it's constantly improving. It should be improving every single week, right? And so I would rather as a founder, I would say, hey, like, I want you to drive revenue, drive logos. I also want you to bring me insights. Every week, how can we make kind of the V1 playbook better?
I totally agree with you on kind of the dynamic nature of the playbook. I do want to get to that element of, you have those 2 reps kind of executing on that kind of first iteration of it. I had Mitch Tarika from Zoom on, and I've had some prior guests on the show who say, always start with a head of sales. They can then hire the team that they want and build their rep base. And then others say, hey, get jack of all trades reps in and roll with the first iteration of the playbook. Where do you advise me as a founder, early stage, seed, series A, do I hire reps first or head of sales first?
It depends. Most of my answers always depends. And that's why people are like, OJ, what's your playbook? I'm like, well, it depends. Okay, so this is how I think about it. If your product and your business is going after an existing category and you're just a much better version of it, right? So there's sometimes already budget, but certainly it's pretty clear who the buyer is and what are you solving. I would lean towards hiring a head of sales. Because that tells me that you probably can grow faster. You're probably on the fast hiring scaling path, like soon in the near future. And so hiring a head of sales can really accelerate things. On the other hand, if you're trying to actually create a new category, right, what you're selling is fundamentally the first piece of that kind of software solving that unmet problem at a company. I think you're better off with hiring some hungry and smart customer-facing people first. Why? Again, talk about that playbook thing. That you gotta learn. You gotta learn, who are you actually selling to? What should be your motion? Like, should you go enterprise? Should you go top down? Should you go bottoms down? Up? Should you go middle down? Up? And so only after that will you actually know what to look for in a head of sales, right? And so I think it kind of depends on your category and your product.
I totally get you. I do like that categorization though between, when there's existing budget, when there's existing consumer or customer education head of sales, and when it's less solid in terms of its packaging, then maybe the rep route. On the rep route, Jason Lemkin always says, hey, hire 2 reps at a time, kind of pit them against each other, kind of Hunger Games style. Do you agree with that suggestion? And how do you think about creating competition and urgency in those first reps that you bring on board?
Yeah. Gosh, I would love to talk to Jason live about this and kind of understand exactly what he had in mind. For me, there are elements that I agree. There are elements that I would not agree, like based on the snippet, right? That you just mentioned. I agree you should hire in batches. If you have the privilege to be able to time your hiring in this environment where it's so hard to hire good people, if you can batch them, great, right? Lots of benefits, onboarding, right? You can actually like kind of have it basically A/B test. Uh, I think though a couple of things around competition. I think if you really need to rely on sort of like having people with the same cohort to drive competition, I think you may have hired the wrong people, in my opinion. Right? Because in that early stage, I'm actually trying to foster more than anything a culture of collaboration. I want us to learn. I want us to co-create that playbook together. And so if I hire the right people, I will hire people who are intrinsically competitive and hate being not being number one. That I don't need to manufacture that environment. Everyone should want to intrinsically want to be number one. I don't need to overtly make it even more so. If anything, I want people to actually come together and work together and share their best practices. Right? That's what I would want.
So we're going to dive into the traits of those reps. Final impossible question, which will likely lead to it depends. But if we think about timing, a lot of founders are like, when the fuck do I hire this head of sales or first sales reps? In terms of timing, again, take us back to that coffee shop you advising me. When do I hire? I don't know.
Number one, I don't know if your first hire has to be sales, right? I think a lot of times, I'm just going to say a customer facing person, right? Could be a little bit more CS than sales. Could be very sales eng kind of almost like a DevRel kind of a persona if you're selling a DevOps product. But I think that is so that's one first clarification, right? It's like I don't think your first person has to be sales. Just make them customer facing so they can get feedback, serve the customer, and help you make better decisions. In terms of timing, I think my answer is a little different today than it would have been 2 years ago. Because today, capital is not that big of an issue, right? Like these seed rounds are massive, these Series A rounds are massive, and so are the valuations that you have to grow into. They're also massive. And so, like, my answer is assuming that you're not that resource constrained. If you're not that resource constrained, spending that much money to hire like a junior customer facing person as early as you can would be my advice. Again, not necessarily drive those revenue, but to get those insights, right? The more customer reps you get and you talk to, the more you'll learn. And I think that should be the approach. If you're approaching, I'm just going to hire, I need to hire a head of salesperson because I needed someone to just drive logos and drive revenue, then I might not be as aggressive. But for me, I want to be very aggressive upfront about learning insights about the market and my potential buyers. That's why I would hire someone ASAP.
Okay, so we're going to hire someone really early. I embraced a chunky ass seed round at a ridiculous price, so I'm just like everyone else in the market right now. And I need to hire these first reps. How do I structure the process? What does the interview stage look like? Can you walk me through it?
Well, number one, right? You mentioned process. I think it's extremely important. I think, and the reason why is number one reason I think is actually, if you over time, if you care about diversity on your team, you want to get your initial hires right, because so much of hiring comes through referrals and such. And so, like, I think building a process from the start is critical, so that you make sure that you iron out as many potential unconscious biases as possible. Yeah. And through that process, I think number one, be really clear about what you're looking for. And be really clear about what are the competencies and the behavioral traits the characteristics that you want to test for. Write them down. Number two, make it really clear what are the questions that we are using to assess them, and what does a great answer look like? What does a mediocre answer look like? Right.
Okay, so let's just pause there and go through them. I'm writing as well. We're an early stage startup. We're sub $1 million in ARR. What I know it's difficult because there's nuance, but if we think back to those, what are we looking for? What sort of things would you say we should all be looking for? And then what questions would you say are brilliant or you always like to really tease out whether that person has those characteristics?
So I'm not going to talk about like the obvious stuff, right? Which is like someone has to like be conversant and be hungry and all that.
Smart
I think
and
the things that
kind.
I always look for in whether you're a leader or just any of my customer facing folks. Number one, reverence for the product. I think there's a you can tell when someone really appreciates the product, the intricacies, what it can do. And I think nowadays, especially in an increasing, PLG is on the rise, I want this person to convey this passion and this love for the product to their customers, as opposed to just following some playbook. And so that reverence for your product or for any kind of product is something I look for.
How do you test that? So we're going to do it one by one. So we're in the interview. What questions do you ask to tease out whether they have that?
So what I'm looking
reverence
for in
product?
most of my answers is not your answer, but how you answer. So in this case, I will ask you to tell me about your product. Just tell me about your product. Very simple. And you will see there's like either it's like, oh my, it's amazing. Let me tell you all the amazing like lives it has changed because it was able to do this and this and this. It is by far the best. Blah, blah, blah. All right. And then you have the other ones. They give you the playbook. They treat you like you're in a, they cold called you and you're like, I accept. Tell me about your product, please. And then they go, okay, we are a platform for increasing the efficiency of for logistics. And you just like, you'll see is there passion for the product itself, or is there just passion for executing a generic thing? It's very obvious, right? So it's the how, it's not the question.
It's true. It's like interviewing them, man. I listen to so many podcasts and I'm like, fuck me, I'm so bored. Because the host sounds so bored. And then people always say to me, you sound like overly excited. And it's like, because I am. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so number one is reverence for products, and I like that. Anything else? What's number
two? If you are expecting this person to like really build a team and scale in time, is like, does this person make people around them better, right? Obviously, if you're a leader, then you should have a track record of like growing talent. But if not, just like even a IC, right? I want people who, especially in the beginning, because every single hire really contributes to your culture. Very important that everybody makes everybody else better, right?
How do we test that in the interview?
So I ask for real examples. So if you're a leader, I'll give you an example. So if you're a leader, I'll always ask, I'll let you know, like, give me an example, right? Give me an example of someone whose career you impacted personally, right? And you kind of like hear it. And usually everybody has one or two examples, or they're able to like manufacture something, okay? That seems okay. But again, this is one where, again, you can tell by the passion, right? Someone talk about, oh my gosh, Harry was a disaster when I met him, but like he had so much potential. We worked on it, right? Or someone would just like talk more factually. So that's already one read. And then I asked another one, which is, and this is the key one, which is, hey, what is and I learned this from probably the best interviewer I know, which is this guy called Tony Huey when we were working at Dropbox together. And it was, hey, tell me about someone who you were not able to get them to reach their fullest potential. And again, it's about how they answer for me, right? In terms of reading it. And the people you want are people who take it personally. It's a personal failure of mine that Harry, I wasn't able to get Harry to reach so much potential. I saw so much potential, but I wasn't able to get there. And you could just tell by the voice how they communicated, right? That is, to me, a sign that, wow, this person is someone who really cares about making people around them better.
Uh-huh. No, I like that. And a red flag in that one would be if they shy away from responsibility and blame the person or blame someone
Absolutely,
else.
absolutely. I mean, I literally, I have had interviews. I mean, so many, but I have some where people say, I get the best out of everybody. I'm like,
My favorite is, what are your challenges today? And this is like an early stage startup, and they're like, honestly, we don't have that many. And you're like, really? Really? I would like to be you. Anyway, okay, so I like that in terms of traits. And any more, yeah, any more that
I
we've
mean,
missed
we
there?
can go on more, but those two, I think, get you pretty far.
Okay, so like and again, I'm asking dumb questions. How many interviews does it take? Who do I bring into the interviews from the wider team? How should I play those two
Yep. So
questions?
remember, like my first step is I'm going to map out the competencies, right? And so, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to optimize for like 10. In fact, like for me, like I would optimize for like 4 to 5, right? And
Yeah.
each interview is designed, each interview slot, right, is designed to test for that specific competency. Now you can merge it, you can do maybe two in the same one or something. But for in my experience, I want 4 or 5 people to have been able to meet someone. And again, each person tests a different competency. So that's one dimension. Second dimension is the final round for me has always been for someone to give a demo. I love people giving demos. You can tell so much about how they prepare asynchronous, right? Because here's the thing, like especially when you're hiring young talent, like no one's super polished. Like there are some people who are super polished, but they may not actually be that good. And so I want to give people a chance and see how do they act if you give them time to prepare. Someone may bomb their on the fly interviews, but they may crush their prepared demo, all right, or presentation. It doesn't have to be a demo. It could just be like a pitch, right? And that tells you that this is someone who has potential. If you give them the time and space and training, they're going to do great. But on the fly, that's something you can work on, right? So I like to kind of have that as well. And then in terms of like the mix of interviewers, number one, I think it's important to make sure your interview slate represents the kind of diversity you want on your team, right? So don't just have all dudes on a panel. And I think it's important to have at least one, if not two, cross-functional partner in that process. It could be recruiting, it could be product,
Got you.
it could be marketing, whatever.
Sales compensation. We like the person. We want it to happen. How do we approach constructing the right sales comp plan? Again, I've never done this before. I have no idea what to do here. What have been some big lessons for you in constructing the right sales comp?
I'm going to start with what I think is a common mistake, which is, okay, the first sales hires I'm hiring from Twilio and Amazon, they are on these sales commission plans. Everybody has sales commission plans. I need a commission plan. Putting in place a commission plan when you're really young and early in your life cycle, I think is potentially very detrimental. And
Why is that?
because number one, once you put in like a sales commission plan, there's a whole bunch of like legal. I mean, you have to sign a legal like there are like legal repercussions that are hard to go back on, especially in a time when you're just starting. How do you know how to set targets? You don't have a track record. The only thing I can usually guarantee you is you're either going to massively exceed your target or you're going to massively miss your target. Generally speaking, that's what happens in the beginning. So if I'm going to figure out a commission plan, I'm almost guaranteed to get it wrong, because how do I calculate the commission rate? And I can ship 2 features in the next quarter that changes that significantly, right? So I think it is something where I would say my biggest lesson here learned is there are many, 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 many different forms of variable compensation. It doesn't have to be just commission. You can do a bonus structure. You can do team comp. You can do team competitions. You don't even have to use variable comp on ARR. In the beginning, you might want to do logos, or you may want to do a number of deals of a certain size. And so there are many ways. I think variable comp is a very, very powerful lever, and it also makes the job fun for sales teams. But again, you don't have to do commissions. You can find different ways to earn that variable compensation.
Any other big mistakes? Any other big nudges or pieces of advice?
Specifically on sales comp. Well, I think it would be a mistake not to give equity. I think sometimes I don't know why, but sometimes I talk to founders and I feel like they treat salespeople as second-class citizens because they feel like the product can sell itself, and so why should sales? And they're just like so incredibly cheap on the equity part. Huge mistake, and it may sound obvious, but like let me explain a little bit more why it's a big mistake. Over time, many companies will want to build sales teams that scale, and you need that customer relationship, right? That the sales and CS team personnel can help you drive. In my experience, your first 20 people you hire, they are the heart and soul of the team. These are the people who understand the intricacies of the product. They understand who to go to on the product team or the engineering team if things are off. They understand how things are done. And these are also the people who you will end up sending as ambassadors around the world to start local offices, right? Because you want to keep a cohesive culture and such. And so these initial people, like I've seen situations where it's more of a transactional relationship between the company and the initial salespeople. Salespeople do well, company does well, that's great, and then they leave to go to some other company because they don't feel like they're really foundational to the company. So that's the mistake. It's like if you lose these in your initial batch, what you have is you have your playbook that is somewhat going to be outdated within the next quarter, and it's really become transactional, and it's very hard to create those deep ties in a team.
Okay, so we've got the right comp plan, we've got the right people. We now need to onboard them, and I think onboarding is something universally where companies suck and fail. When we think about ideal onboarding processes, what does that look like in your mind, and what would you advise me when it comes to onboarding new sales reps?
And we're talking about like you're still early stage. You're hiring.
Not early stage. I am Series A seed.
Yeah. Okay. I would sequence product knowledge first, and then sales knowledge, right? Kind of like, and then so I would do product first, market first, second, and sales last.
Okay.
So product first, right? Like in the beginning, you're not going to have a full-fledged sales team where you have SEs, sales engineers who can handle the technical things. You may not even know what gotchas you have in your whatever data model your company was built on. So in the beginning, I think it's super important that like whatever customer facing people you hire, they have to play that role. They have to go two orders of magnitude deeper on the technical side of the product, whether it's talking about the security, the infrastructure, with like a CISO or a CIO, than kind of your future A's, right? And so I think in the beginning, it's really important to build that product knowledge. A lot of times, the best way to do that is actually get the team exposed to support, because the tickets that you get coming in is basically a reflection of your likely sales obstacles that you're going to get, right? And so you want to be able to talk about it, understand, number one. Number two, the market.
Just so I get that right. So we put them with product. They sit with product for a week, a day. What sort of level of exposure? Just dumb question.
I actually say it's less product in the beginning. It's actually more, you start with support because everyone's going to be filing all your bugs. Then you as an AA, go get some answers. Understand, like, not just how we answer it. Like, go and find the engineer to understand why things are built a certain way, right? That's how I would actually have it. It's like figure out what will likely be your more difficult product questions, and you go find the answers because we don't have a playbook yet.
Got you.
Right.
Okay, so then we put them in support. They understand from the tickets and from the knowledge they get from the feedback. Then
Yeah.
market. What do we do for market knowledge? How do we educate them there?
Yeah. So that is like that to me is probably like at this point probably going through your fundraising deck,
Huh.
right? Because at this point you probably don't have a sales pitch.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember at Asana when I joined it. When I joined Asana, we had 20 million in revenue, mainly driven from our self-serve business, right? And there was no, we didn't have a sales deck. Okay, so it's very common that you don't, and so at that point you're probably taking your fundraising deck, right? And you're just like educating on like here are the players. This is what we're trying to. This, here's the competition, right? And you're kind of like getting your one-on-one that way. Why I think it's important to do a market first is, I think it's well put it this way. I want to put the sales stuff last because that's the stuff that like you will get the team will hone in on forever. It's really hard to like, okay, you're in the middle, you're ramping, you're fully ramped to like then suddenly come back and be like, let me just educate you on the market. Like the absorption is not going to be there. Plus, I actually think that people will be higher performers if they actually understand broadly what's happening. What are the drivers, right? Because you want to educate them, not in terms of like your sales messaging and value articulation yet, but hey, it's just like, this is what's going on in the world. This is why we exist. What's the mission that we're trying to do? That's why.
And then so we've got the kind of first they're in customer support and they're in support. Second, they're going through the decks, they're understanding the market, the competition. Third, being sales, the last component. What is involved in that third component being the sales orientation?
Yeah, my guess is if you're hiring your first couple of people, right, it is like you're shadowing the founder
Uh-huh.
on a couple conversations. I think absolutely you go talk to your top 10 customers and you develop a relationship there. I mean, these are probably pretty friendly customers, and really ask like, hey, you start asking like the questions around like, hey, how you can even ask a customer like, how like we haven't written a case study yet, but like how would you quantify the value that we provided to you, right? You probably have to do that because no one has done that yet, if they hasn't done that. So you basically shadow the founder for a little bit, and then what I do is like it culminates for me. This is where I mentioned a demo earlier. Like you may not need to do a demo during the interview process. Absolutely, I want someone to demo the product at the end of whatever onboarding period you designate as reasonable. And it is in this, and like this is kind of like the equivalent of a PhD defending their thesis for me. You're coming in, you're going to present your demo of our product, and we are going to actually role play. And I invite, it would be like, if I'm the founder, right? I would found one founder, it would be a PM, right? And like whatever the other 2-3 people you have in the customer facing team. So it's high stakes, right? Because if you can't even like present to your own team, you forget about customers. So it ends up being a good forcing function to wrap up everything that someone has learned. And in that demo, someone plays a role of depending on your buying, right? You're trying to role play. So like someone's like a CISO, someone's a CIO, someone's the actual champion, and you see how you see how it acts. And that's basically a certification process.
How long is this three-stage process, number one, and when do we allow these new reps to speak to their first customers?
I'm just like, I have to like go back in time to think about this super early stage, right? I feel like 2 months is reasonable at this stage to get to a point where like they're really, really solid with like a great demo. They have acquired all this knowledge. That doesn't mean that they can't talk to customers earlier. If you're a PLG company where you have a good reasonable flow of inbound, or you're an open source company where you can like sort of tap into a community, I think within 3 weeks they can start talking to customers. They may not need to be selling, right? Because like again, I just want to hire some good customer facing people at first. So that in the beginning, they might just be talking to existing customers, just being like checking in. What do you love about the product? What do you don't like about the product? What's your issues? Right? Just like get more reps. I do think it's important to get reps, but just because you're talking to customers at that point doesn't mean you're truly ready yet. So this is the one difference between PLG companies and non-PLG companies. You can actually start doing that, and it helps with accelerating the ramp.
You mentioned the difference there between PLG and non-PLG. In terms of for new reps, often when it's PLG, they just have a lot of inbound to service, and it's a lot more on a plate, bluntly. When that plateaus, you said before to me that you can't just kind of go outbound. What did you mean by this, like not being able to just go outbound?
Yeah, I see this pattern everywhere. So let me just start by saying this. Like, I love PLG. I breathe and bleed PLG. At the same time, I love outbound. Outbound's way easier. It's like I love going outbound, okay? But I think going out for outbound to be successful, generally speaking, you're selling to a different buyer, probably a more senior persona. You're probably selling a different value. And so therefore you need different messaging. In terms of the sales process, absolutely you'll have a much lower conversion rate. And to make up for that, your deal size needs to be commensurately bigger. And generally speaking, that will require a different type of talent to execute that. Okay? So what I see a lot happening is sometimes people's initial inbound thing goes, it's like you hit that S curve, it's amazing. And then suddenly it just like starts plateauing. You're like, what the heck is going on? I don't know. The answer I always hear is, well, we're just going to start going outbound now. Again, outbound's fine. But if what you mean by going outbound is you're just going to get some salespeople to go buy some lists and just start cold emailing, LinkedIn bombing people, it's not going to work because your entire conversion process is designed around a different buyer, articulating a different value, right? Converting at a higher speed and smaller deals. So if you want to go outbound, I'm all for it, right? I say, but what you need to do is you got to make sure your marketing team is aligned, right, to actually generate and work with you to develop the right messaging for this different persona. Your product probably needs some augmentation to sell a bigger deal. So if you're going to go outbound, just make it a company and initiative, and not just hire some salespeople to go outbound, because I don't think it's going to work. And so that's what I mean. And then what happens I see there is like it becomes a crutch because a lot of companies go, I'm just waiting for my VP of sales to show me that outbound works to like continue the inbound lead funnel. It's apples and oranges. What I wish I see more is, hey, our inbound funnel seems to be not growing at the same rate of our expectation. How can we inflect that, right? What else can we do to drive more inbound, right? Is it whether it's how can you generate more word of mouth? How can we have a more performant conversion, converting website, whatever that is.
So it's not waiting until that plateau really hits. It's being diversified enough where you go, okay, we're starting to see a tail off in terms of the PLG motion. Now's a good time to start layering on.
Yeah, like I would say this, like, yeah, exactly. Just because you see some signs of initial like plateauing of your initial PLG playbook, right, for the company, doesn't mean that the party's over, right? And therefore you need to go outbound. Like that's like the last thing you should do because it takes so much to company-wide to make it work.
No, listen, I totally agree. I think people consistently underappreciate what it takes to go outbound effectively. I think one area that I would love to dig into in particular, though, is really the relationship between head of sales and the CEO. For me, as the first-time CEO, what should that ideal relationship look like? And what can I do to get the best out of my head of sales?
Yeah, my relationship with the CEO is super important. And for me, it's one of partnership, right? Like my job is to I gotta bring home the bacon. I gotta get the cash in, right? I get that. But there's a bigger play here, which that I have in my head, which is I see an equally important part of my responsibility as a CRO, head of sales, whatever, is to help my CEO make the best decisions that he or she can. And to do that, that means that I am responsible to bring back the right amount and type and in the right form of feedback, right, to my CEO so that he or she can make the best decisions. It's my responsibility to make sure that I and my team don't have recency bias, right, based on the last deal that wasn't able to close. Like, it's my job to make sure that the CEO knows what's working, what's not working, for the purpose of his or her decision making. And so I think it's really important. And to do that,
How often do we meet, OJ? Is this a weekly thing? Is this a monthly thing?
at an early stage, I would hope it's a weekly thing,
Okay.
minimum. Yeah, I mean, I think in the early stage, I think it ought to be quite frequent. And if you're not, that means that you're just not getting enough. You're not collecting enough learnings and insights for your CEO.
Can I ask,
That's how I would say.
do you do deal reviews and postmortems? And if so, how do you structure them?
Deal reviews for sure. For sure. Every week we have deal reviews, even when we're really, really small. Usually you have a qualification framework and you kind of go through it. And usually in the early stages, like everything is like unqualified. But it's good to have that rigor to start. Postmortem, at Asana, we had a practice called 5 Whys. It's adopted from Toyota that I think is very effective. It's a practice where
What are 5 whys?
5 Whys, like
What are
when
the
something
5?
goes wrong. Basically, it's saying when something goes wrong, you want to get to like the 5th level of, okay, why did this fail? Oh, because someone messed up. Okay, well, why does the person mess up? Well, because this person wasn't trained well enough. Why wasn't this person trained well enough? Oh, because we didn't hire sales enablement. Well, why didn't we hire sales enablement earlier? Oh, recruiting didn't have enough bandwidth, and so we deliberately chose to prioritize something else. So it's important to, when you do this postmortem, to really understand if something doesn't go well, right? Really, like, why you lost a deal. There usually are multiple layers, as opposed to what you normally first hear, which is that like, bad timing, got pushed to next month.
What's the
You
answer
hear
to that
that?
one? Because I often have this where it's like, oh yeah, they pushed it, not a priority, bad timing. How do you respond to that? Why is it bad timing? Like, what would you respond?
Why is it not urgent? And normally we just end there, because normally the rep may not actually have the answer, right? Oh, why is it not urgent? Well, they think that it is the always the responsibility of the customer to make timing work. But hey, it's also part of our job to try to create that urgency, right? And so it's 5 Whys is really not about getting to the answer. I think it's about really like creating the right level of discussion. It's a framework to create the right conversations so that you will, through that process, find 1 or 2 big like core root problems that you can address.
My final one, my favorite is we lost our champion, so there was nothing that we could do internally. It's just that the person who wanted it left. How would you like analyze that with the 5 whys? Like, why didn't we have a broader base of supporters?
Yeah, well,
Is
yeah,
that the answer?
exactly. Like yeah, start with like, why did this person leave? Sometimes this person left, and you realize that you were actually always talking to the wrong person. So right? Okay, why did we have more time? Why weren't we multi-threaded is the lingo? Why weren't we multi-threaded in this account? Right? Usually it's like, we just, usually it's just like, we didn't get to it. It's usually the thing. Don't get it. But then it stops there. But it's interesting to be like, why didn't we get through it? It could be like, well, we didn't get through it because we have so many freaking accounts, right? And so what you realize that, you need to actually work on a prioritization system, as opposed to being, well, we didn't do it. Okay, we should do it next time.
I love it. Listen, I could talk to you all day, OJ. I want to move into my favorite, which is a quick fire round. So I say a short statement and you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do what sales tactics have not changed over the last 5 years.
The need to articulate your business impact and value.
What sales tactic has died a death over the last 5 years?
Emails.
Expand on that.
Emails, cold emails. I think this idea, like the predominant motion now is I'm just gonna blast email, a bunch of people, see who responds. I mean, this starts even with like early days marketing automation with like Marketo and stuff. Like, oh, this person like clicked on my link, they must be really interested. Oh, they read my white paper. Like, I just don't believe in that anymore. I don't think people download white papers and do that anymore. Like there's way too much rich content and information on the internet now. They're reviewing different products, and no one's gonna be doing that anymore. So that whole like MQL to PQL to MQL to SQL, all that, I just think that's done.
Tell me, what's the biggest mistake you see founders make when hiring their first sales teams?
I think the mistake is not investing much in thinking about the bridge between the customer-facing teams and the product teams. Like thinking through how does the voice of the customer gets captured, brought back to product. And to me, I think companies should spend as much time on that as they should on like their sales playbook.
What piece of advice would you give to a sales leader starting a new position today?
Well, today's environment is really tough for new sales leaders because you're almost certain going to be walking into a situation where you have a valuation that is probably 3 years ahead, crazy multiple, and you need to grow. You need to prove progress very quickly. So with that context, today, I would say most sales leaders forget to manage up. Most sales leaders come in, they focus so much on building their own team, writing that playbook, some cross-functional stuff, but they don't have the experience to manage up. And I think you have to manage up really well, especially in this environment, if you want to succeed. And managing up, it doesn't mean like managing lower expectations. It just means you need to make sure your dialogue with the founder, CEO, and the board is really clear.
Final one. What one company sales strategy have you most been impressed by over the last couple of years?
I need to get back to you. I've been so focused on Asana. I have not explored outside that much.
We can switch it up for a different one, which is what would you most like to change about the world of sales?
What would I change? I think sales still today, when people think of sales, they still have this picture of some used car salesman image. And I think what salespeople do at the core is they help customers solve their problems. They happen to do that sometimes because your product actually does that really well, right? But that is what sales is about. You're solving problems for customers. It's not that different than that of a product manager. It's just how you do about it differently. And so I think a lot of times in tech, frankly, I think sales people are second-class citizens because they're not building a product and all that. And I think I would love to change that because I think the best companies are the ones where sales, collecting customer feedback, working with customers directly are on equal footing with with product.
OJ, this was so much fun to do. As you can tell from the run over, I love this. So thank you so much for joining me, and I can't thank you enough for giving the time.